Hello and welcome to the DevDC podcast. Today we have Rusty Pickens joining us. Welcome, Rusty. How are you?
Hi, Shay. I am great. Thanks for making some time and chatting with me. Excited to be here.
Hey, that's a great microphone you have right there. Love it.
Thank you. On a second or third try, we'll get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rusty, thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's a hot day in DC and excited to be, enjoying some air conditioning and chatting with you about your career and speaking about what you're seeing in the industry, and then sharing any advice for folks out there. I know you have a strong, DevOps and developer background. So definitely want to dig into that, as well as hear about implementing Salesforce over at the White House. And now you're running your own practice today, right? So you're running like a gamut of, responsibilities and currently and in the past, and excited to hear about that. So thank you again for joining. And I'll swing it over to you, Rusty. I would love to hear about your story from a technology standpoint and a personal standpoint, wherever you want to kick it off.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, let's just jump in. So happy to familiarize myself with your listeners and excited to talk about this stuff. Man, it's hard to encapsulate a lot of this, Shay. I have been telling people lately that I'm just crossing the threshold of 25 years of experience. And so that feels like a lifetime in IT. And it feels like it has not been that long either, but originally I'm from Southeastern Oklahoma, way out in the middle of nowhere, rural country boy, heart of Indian territory, and cut my teeth back in the day on, traditional sort of help desk, getting started on network operations and things like that for my Indian tribe. So I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation from back there and worked in our tribal hospital for a while and learned all about the migration from old school, green screen line terminals, moving on to PCs and TCP/IP, and ended up spending 5 or 6 years there. And at 26 years old, was managing a team of 4 or 5 to do network operations and connecting all of our sites. And then, gosh, I kind of had a crisis. We could talk a little bit about this in depth, and especially on the personal development side for your listeners. Like, I feel like IT people sometimes reach a crossroads in their life where you can pursue really deep dive technical certifications and maybe not go your traditional educational route. And I sort of went or tried to go down both paths at the same time. So I pursued Microsoft certification in the mid 90s. Was having a good time at that, and then dropped out of school. And so I quit my undergrad halfway through and realized later, like, man, if you're going to start managing people and leading organizations, you really need those degrees. So ended up getting, 5 to 7 years of experience, tagging out of my job at the Chickasaw Nation, going back to school, spending another 2.5 years, and then graduating with a computer science undergrad degree in 2007. And then just kind of did a hard pivot. So like there was an opportunity that came my way again through my tribe to move to DC and become involved in sort of tribal affairs on Capitol Hill, which was super interesting. And I thought, man, I've got a degree, I've got some work experience and an opportunity to leave Oklahoma and go check out the wider world. And I just went for it. And that's sort of the big division point of my life. Like when I arrived in DC, that, hot August summertime of 2007, getting involved in Indian affairs and working around Capitol Hill, and caught what my boss then called Potomac fever and got swept up in politics. And man, it's been a wild ride for the last 15 years.
So yeah, to your point, going back to where there's really 2 paths that you can take for some of our listeners a little bit earlier in their career. Mentioned go either the formal degree or the certs. Do you think life's changed a little bit, and in IT that you really have to pick one or the other? You think you pigeonhole yourself if you do go one way? Just kind of curious what your thoughts are, having been a leader since then.
I think they're all viable in different ways. And the biggest advice I could give to people is like, really know yourself and your skill set. So if you are a deep thinking computer scientist who has no interest in leading a team or ever doing, front facing product work, you could go deep on certs, get your Amazon engineer certs or Salesforce TechArc certs or something, at that caliber and that level. Those folks are going to command big bucks and they're going to be rare, but to put the effort and the emphasis on that, you're probably foregoing, soft skills and leadership skills and all that other stuff. And it's rare that I would say you find a person that has a good balance across both of those, even though they're out there. So you tend to sort of pick one or the other. And I would say probably the slim minority of people kind of move down the middle. And then it's like, well, okay, we're going to have somebody who's maybe a jack of all trades, but master of none. Like we could be a little good at engineering and a little good at product and leadership, but maybe not great at both at either,
Yeah, sure.
So really it's like you figure out your own skills and strengths and then go deep on whatever makes you happy, don't try to be everything.
Yeah, no, that's definitely what you have to do. You have to focus in order to become excellent at something, right? You can't be well, I mean, it's interesting because I often hear you need to within IT, right? You need to have a general understanding of like the ecosystem and then pick what's hot and what's up and coming and dive
Right.
deep in that, but still understand how what is new relates to everything else that's changing. So
Yeah.
I am curious from your career, how you went about deciding and finding out really what you're passionate about. And yeah, I'd love to hear about why you're passionate about those things.
Yeah. Well, it has been sort of a process of discovery and multiple phases of my career. I mean, to your point, I think I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't really dig in and like do my time in the trenches of a help desk, and like answer those service desk calls and get yelled at by customers and stuff like that. That's character building stuff.
Right.
But also all of those things on the enterprise IT side, like learning how the servers work and how you administer a data center and understanding, network topologies. It's second nature now to me. So like when push comes to shove, get involved in a conversation like that, and we're troubleshooting DNS in a cloud instance or something, like I can still have those conversations and knowing enough about that to sort of guide the team and be dangerous there. But also put on the leadership hat and like trust and delegate and let other folks run that stuff down. I think at this point, 25 years in, it's like you couldn't be the person you are today without that solid underpinning. But also, man, the world has changed so much. Like cloud computing technology, everything rolls over every 3 years. And so to put your finger in the air and think about what's coming next is going to be hard because it could happen like a flash in the pan and then be over, and then the next thing, what you've dedicated your time to for 3 years could be on the waning side, so you kind of have to stay abreast of this stuff at all times and keep learning and getting better. And I don't think we ever really stop on that,
Right.
but it takes a lot to combine most of that stuff together into an effective mix.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am curious about how you uh, were able to strike that mix, right? Because you need to keep a pulse on what's coming, and you also need to stay abreast of what's going on at the daily. So how did you like navigate your career to now be at the position where you're at 580 Strategies running your own firm?
Yeah, definitely an evolution. I mean, in the beginning days, it was sort of, go where the work is and do what people are telling you they need. So help desky kind of stuff, take an inventory of systems, like the very unsexy kind of terrible stuff that we have to do in IT just to make operations flow. And just learning, voraciously reading, going after all those certifications, kind of learning all those skills and then figuring out what I was good at. And then somewhere about halfway through, I also started to realize, especially after managing projects, I would say this started to happen after I started managing projects, realizing that I wanted to have a seat at the table and kind of a voice of leadership, not necessarily, I wasn't thinking about it as leadership. Frankly, I was kind of, self-serving in that point. It's like, I want our teams to be represented and I want to feel like I have some ownership and some equity and determining how we as a team go forward and the solutions we build and stuff. And that's where it started. And it's like, okay, in order to do that, that's a whole other set of skills. Like that's leadership and communication skills and presentation and stuff. And so it was kind of like a good context switch of, all right, got a good enough handle on the engineering. Let's set that down and focus on leadership. And went through the Dale Carnegie course and a lot of that stuff and sort of learned about how to be better at other things and then combining those together. And really, I had to do some deep soul searching after I left the government too about, man, do I want to go, join a big tech company here and be, sort of a cog in their machine, or do I want to try to do my own thing? And ended up landing on doing my own thing and have been really, really pleasantly surprised with it now. So
one thing you said I thought was pretty interesting, right? You were in the trenches and then you recognized that you wanted to be representing the team. So it seems like either way, you're going through the trenches as an engineer, whether you end up going down the certs and deep diving in on technology, or you take the transition towards leadership. How did you stay motivated? Because I'm sure other people are struggling with this right now. How did you stay motivated, making sure that you're a well-polished engineer early on in your career when you had an inkling that leadership was probably the direction you're eventually going to take?
Yeah, well, that is a tough one. I mean, I have gotten to work with some really talented people and was fortunate to have some brilliant folks on my teams early in the career. And,
Okay.
they just challenge you to do better. Like I'm sure the engineers will identify with this a lot of, you can have a 5-minute conversation with somebody on a tech topic and you're going to know right away whether they know what they're talking about or not,
Yeah.
And so those really smart people drive you to be better. And in those engineering conversations, it's like, okay, well, I can hold my own in this space. But then making the jump over to the leadership side, man, there was just such like imposter syndrome. It's like, well, why should I be representing my team? And how do we know that we're the smartest in the whatever, and sort of operating in those ecosystems where you think you're good, but you're not quite sure you're good. And you keep second guessing yourself, and I guess my advice to your audience would be, just let that stuff go and be excellent at what you're doing. And it's going to show through. Like when you own something deep in your heart or your soul and you're just putting it out there and you're just being yourself, you're going to come forward with such authority and like self-assuredness that all, any of that imposter syndrome stuff is just going to kind of evaporate. And that I think is helped me get over the fear on the leadership side. Was it's okay to raise your hand in a meeting and talk to the CIO about a thing that nobody else knows anything about. You can look around the room and you're like, everybody else is just going to love that you sound smart. So just speak up, say it, I wish I had known a lot more of that in the early days of like, be the engineer, be the smart people in the room and just take leadership by the horns, and go do it. Because people are looking for that, I think, especially in the networking world that I was living in. There was nobody else doing those roles and we knew we were really good at it. And you just kind of have to step up and command that swim lane, if you will. And that's not to say that you forget the others or you disempower them or any one star shines brighter. It's just that this was, my team's lane and the things we were focused on. And we were too hesitant around that oftentimes. And I found that leadership, quote unquote, kind of vacuum helped me figure out I need to step into this and help take the team to the next level,
Beautiful. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like, don't be afraid to speak up. And if you have a question or think you need to make a statement, other people are probably feeling the same way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Do not be shy. I mean, we second guess ourselves so much and it's like, well, oh, why should I raise my hand? Why? That's a dumb question. Don't do that. It's like, no, if you've got that question and it's in your mind, there's probably a good guarantee that 2 or 3 other people in the room do. So just speak up and, don't be afraid to be a little vulnerable, but you can throw that out there in a way that's not going to belittle other people, or it certainly won't make you sound like an idiot, because I'm sure you already know what you're talking about. You're just second guessing yourself before opening your mouth.
And, this, I guess, mindset and strategy eventually, I think one of the cooler things that you've done, and you can totally add other ones, is implementing Salesforce for the Obama administration. Was that as exciting as it sounds? I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is the best / craziest / maybe worst opportunity I've ever had in my life. It was wild, Shay. It was a perfect storm of events. And I look back on it now and think, at the time, it didn't feel that great. It was like, this is a tremendous challenge. There's zero margin for error. We cannot fail. This feels like a really heavy responsibility, but then when I look back on it, like it's also with my time, joining President Obama's campaign and some of that stuff, I can't imagine what would have happened had I not been there, and so there are moments in your life where you're just the right person at the right time to do the right thing. And that's really what it felt like. I mean, going back to those days, my first tour of duty in government was just the biggest fire that we had. When you work in politics, especially for a president as a political appointee, you just go where they send you. Like you have very little margin to say no, and so my first tour was small business administration, and we were trying to dig ourselves out of an economic recovery, and I did 2 years of really tough, hard data center modernization work there. And along the way, got my PMP certification, and then ended up rolling off of that assignment and sort of looking for the next gig. And just by sheer serendipity, there was a vacancy at the White House. There was a civil servant who had retired, and the CIO was an Obama team person, and he was looking for a new project manager in a junior role. And they came across my resume. And, you could never line that stuff up. Like when I look at this now back on my career, I'm like, that red line that kind of goes through all those things. There's no way you could plan for that kind of stuff. But if I hadn't said yes when they asked, and if I hadn't taken the PMP test when I did, and if I hadn't done those things, like I wouldn't have been able to take advantage of that opportunity. So then I got there, and like the dust is settling on, wow, you actually work at the White House, and you're moving around the complex and getting to know all these really crazy people that you're sort of fanboying over. And
Sure.
The CIO brought me into his office, and he was like, look, our correspondence system is failing. Like it has been running for 2.5 years. It is overgrown. It's collapsing on itself. We've got 18 hours of outages in the middle of a work week. Like, I need you to fix this. And he just kind of like stared into my soul and said, you got to do this. I'm delegating this to you as the project manager, And so, man, we started the clock, and we went out and did market research and all that hard fought acquisition stuff that you have to do. And it took like 2 years of work to get it off the finish line. And, I was the project manager for that, and then ended up evolving into the product owner for it. And that was really tough work that took a lot of negotiating and talking with acquisition people and technology stuff. Working directly with the correspondence office to make sure it was going to meet their needs. And so lots and lots of stakeholder engagement. But if I hadn't been building those skills throughout my career all the way through, I wouldn't have been ready at that point to take advantage of it, And so it just kind of kept rolling. Gosh, I think that was fiscal year 13, I believe. And we were coming up on the end of the fiscal year, and we had 60 days to implement Salesforce and go live because the old contract was expiring and there was no runway. It was, when it comes midnight on October 1st, the system's going off and they're going to send us a backup copy, and good luck. And we activated it, and my contract team helped me spin that up, and we cut over the correspondence pages and the letter scanning software. And then we promptly had to go home for 14 days for the government shutdown. So it sort of never ends. Like we went live, and then we immediately had one of the longest government shutdowns we've had as a country in a while, and had to recover from that too. But that's another story.
Yeah, no kidding. What did it mean for the White House and for the folks that you're working with to bring in Salesforce in the capacity that you did?
Yeah, well, so during that time, I mean, it kind of feels quaint to talk about this stuff nowadays because with things like FedRAMP around and everybody just going wild over cloud computing and CSPs, man, we just didn't have that. So in 2009, we were a digital first campaign, the largest amount of online grassroots fundraising that had ever been done by a candidate, and all this cutting edge digital stuff. And then you get to government, and they're like, here is a BlackBerry from, 2007, and you can't get on the internet. Twitter is literally blocked by the firewalls, and so that was the environment we came into.
Different now.
Yeah, nobody can work from home. Citrix barely functions. Hardly anybody's got laptops, and everybody comes into the agency offices to work. And so a lot of what we did was trying to get the frameworks built to get the tools we needed to do the job. And we finally started turning a corner on that in like 2013, 2014, after years of work on this stuff. A lot of it was focused on acquisition improvement, a la healthcare.gov. So healthcare.gov was one of the sort of flagship failures in that regard of we've really got to rethink how we buy technology for the government. And they gave us a lot of latitude to make some changes right there at the executive office of the president. So a lot of my work was locking arms with a contracting officer and saying, the way we buy IT ain't working. We have this radical idea. It's called cloud computing and agile software development, and we want to try that with you. Can we build contracts that'll let us get to the tools we need for these like crazy stakeholders across the street who are just like, we've got to execute right now. And so the second platform in the door was Salesforce. The first one, we were lucky to be able to subcontract out Amazon Web Services for whitehouse.gov. But Salesforce was the first one we bought outright, as licenses for that kind of stuff at that level. And we only had the first use case, it was wheelhouse case management, correspondence management. And we got that part of the system stood up, and we were processing, 1-ish million letters a year to President Obama. And then we started building on it. Like, I mean, it sort of exploded because of the success story we were able to demonstrate with case management. We were in a good place to have the tech then. And that's when the US Digital Service kind of started coming online, and they joined, our sister agency there at Office of Management and Budget. And they looked around and said, what, we don't have any technology. Like, we can't even get Wi-Fi in our offices. Can you help? And so they came to us pleading, and we're like, yeah, we'll give you a couple of sprints of Salesforce work. And we shipped the recruitment tracker for USDS on the same platform, So if you can kind of get a foot in the door with some modernization, wins and quick hits and successes there, you can just start building on that stuff. And
So
we shipped a lot of cool things by the time I rolled off in 2015.
Okay, so I'm trying to get a timeline of everything. So you mentioned, hey, we have an interesting thought around Agile and Cloud.
Yeah.
What year was that you had brought that up?
Well, those conversations around the White House were happening around 2011.
Right.
I mean, when I came in, we were fortunate to have just been moving over onto a new contract for whitehouse.gov. So I didn't really lead that effort, but we had outsourced to a big development team, and they were running atop AWS. But we knew this is the way we operated in the campaign and the commercial world, but it was just nowhere to be found in the government, really. There was no
exactly.
ATF,
And that's what I'm trying to understand the timeline of. So if you could shed some light on this for me, I would appreciate it. So I would imagine, or how did cloud initially get into the federal side? You said 2011 was White House. I would imagine you had I guess it's kind of an interesting word to say it was political because we're in the White House, but I imagine there's some politics to play and other things to figure out about cloud in general in Fed. So wondering how you navigated that.
Those are sort of fascinating, deep government things. Well, so I would characterize it as two tracks. So there was the one that was like the higher level, way above my pay grade, like strategic side, which was Vivek Kundra, the first federal CIO. So remember, even in those days, we didn't have a federal CIO. Like, you had agency CIOs, but they were not
there was no
margin to the right.
That makes sense.
It was what do they call it? The office of E something or other at OMB was about the closest thing we had. But President Obama nominated and named and carved out a position for the federal CIO. And so Vivek was a great advocate for cloud computing. And he's like, this is the way we're going to be able to save money. We're going to be able to ship stuff faster. You can't have a responsive government without embracing cloud computing, and we're already behind. So he issued multiple memos, tried to get the budget house in order for having to move on some of this stuff. And so all of the engineers are looking around and we're like, yes, absolutely, we have to have cloud computing. We can't really do our jobs anymore with these big data centers and mainframes around that are struggling under their own weight. So that was happening like up at Vivek's level and just sort of generally across the entirety of the civilian side of government. Down at our level, it's really interesting to deep dive on this stuff because White House, while it's super visible, like everybody anywhere knows about the White House and all this stuff that's going on and who the president of the United States is and whatever. But the agency is tiny. It's like 1,000 people. And the budget for the IT is like dwarfed by all these other civilian agencies, But the cool part that it has going for it is it can largely be experimental. So if the president and his team says he wants it, right, then you can sort of move mountains. And so our CIO was on board, our senior leadership was on board, and they were like, we need to figure out how to make this work. So, contracting, tech, go figure it out, and we'll give you the cover that you need to try some of this stuff. And that's how we ended up there. Like, we ended up saying, hey, we're going to do, $500,000 cloud computing buy here, and we're going to spin up a tiny little Agile team, and we're just going to see how it goes. And like, we sort of all knew we know we can make this work. It's going to be fine. But if we have to say that we're going to do this as a pilot and just try it and then give the government the option to just shut it off if it fails miserably, if that's what it took. And that's how we got our foot in the door with this stuff. And then by the time we started generating success with both, the cloud platforms themselves, but also Agile as a method of delivery, you make believers out of people when stakeholders can see, oh my gosh, you've shortened this project timeline down to like 1/16 of what it was. Their eyes light up and they start thinking about all this other stuff that's on their wish list that they wish you could do, and then you start moving out on it. And the work really never ends, but it was a lot easier once we had the tools and the framework to help that stuff.
All right, that's a super interesting story, and I want to ask about where your mind is as far as like cloud and DevOps and delivery of applications today. But before I jump into like, and I don't want to say it wrong. So I know 580 is the area code. You guys call it 580?
Yeah, it's 580.
580? 580? Okay.
Yep.
But 580 is the area code for Oklahoma, like the area that you're from. So I'm sure that's not a coincidence. But before I hop into like present day, what other, if you want to chat about it, what other projects did you do leaving the White House before, starting your own firm?
Yeah. Well, so
if any, and I don't want to
yeah, no, it's fine. I mean,
what you're doing right now.
These are so fascinating, Shade. Gosh, I wish we could talk all day about it, but
well, maybe we can meet up later, but we got about 40 minutes here.
No, we carried forward and we did the best we could there at White House, and a lot of things started changing. It's probably okay to talk about some of this stuff now, but like there was a lot of hacking that went on, and so there was a bunch of regrouping on the security side, and so I characterize working at the White House as like dog years in time. So by the time I was approaching my 4th year there, I was just done, man. It was a lot of work. There was so much happening. There was a lot of stress in other levels. There were leadership changes that just weren't really working out. And so it was kind of time to chart a new chapter and see what was next. And I had some friends and former colleagues in leadership that had made the jump to State Department. And they said, hey, we need a great cloud ops person. Come over here and help us get Salesforce off the ground at State. So I did. And man, it was amazing. It was so much fun. We took all that sort of corpus of knowledge that we had built at the White House and tried to make an honest effort at it at State. But I only had about 1.5 years there, but getting to go around the world to US embassies and install Salesforce and teach people how to work on it was really, really cool. Once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah,
and then,
totally.
Boom, November 2016 happened, transition, January, we're done. Like it's time to tag out,
Yeah. And here we are today, right? We'll fast forward a little bit. Like what excites you about what you're doing today at 580 Strategies?
Yeah, well, so it is the same sort of work, but it's just taking on evolution and it's growing, and it feels really interesting to me now. When I look back on career and stuff, like supporting these agencies and these missions can take a lot of different forms. And so where it used to be like I was the guy who was the political appointee or the project manager or the product owner for a thing, I have stepped out of that seat, and now I'm like providing subject matter experts and teams of my own to go in and help these people do this stuff. So the missions of the agencies are the same, and the politics may have shifted a little bit, but the government still has tremendous amounts of work to do. And so it has been interesting for me to now be in the supporting role. So like, how do I provide you with best practices on Agile, or how I would approach cloud, or helping you achieve ATO, or whatever, whatever the agency's trying to do. So I've been doing that now for 4-ish years. And if anything else, I've proven to myself that it will work and it will be successful, and so I had a ton of anxiety about starting my own business, but it is working and it's good, but it's just a different place in the equation than where I was when I was in government, but it's all still the same equation, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It's definitely a piece of the puzzle, right? Everyone needs to hire folks that have expertise in order to get to what their end goal is. And I'm sure you guys bring a lot of value. I am curious, you running your own firm, like what do you look for? What's a good profile for you to hire? And what kind of, I guess, benefits do you bring as a collective group when you're assigned projects or one project?
Yeah, well, we are, I've always only ever wanted to be the small business, so, there are plenty of the big guys out there doing the high level consulting work, but I wanted to be different and set ourselves apart. And so that's part of why the name is strange. It's like, this is from my roots back in Oklahoma and, planning to make moves and try to get back there and hire folks from Oklahoma to work for me. At the moment, we're growing, but we're still tiny. And so our differentiator is subject matter expertise on this stuff. Like right away, I can come in and say, I've been there and done that for 3 different agencies, and here's how I can help you think about it, at the very least. But then also, we've just been leaning in and excelling on Salesforce rollouts and AWS. And so I love it, man, because these are very small teams, but they're super smart people. And so to be rolling out like mainstream's not the right word, cutting edge DevSecOps for the government is a thing that's not well known or done right now. And like, I am really enjoying using new tools and fresh approaches on this stuff and sort of teaching the government how to do this. And I think they feel like it's equally as valuable. Like it's
Good.
hard to find folks that can do this stuff right and well. And that's what sets us apart is tiny but mighty, subject matter experts.
Perfect. And you guys being a tiny, mighty subject matter expert, I have to ask, like, some of our listeners out here, a lot of them are in the DevOps space or are engineers. What, in your opinion, does the future look like, and where should folks be spending their time to become, dangerous in certain technologies in order to stay relevant as the world's, cloud computing continuously is evolving?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a few different parts of my answer here. So
Okay.
back in the day, so those early days of me coming into government, like we were just obsessed with uptime and making sure that the servers were okay and disaster recovery and backups. Like
Yeah, sure.
not the same world anymore.
Yeah, I
Let
came
that
from
stuff go.
I came from that world at one point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so, I mean, just imagine the amount of person hours we put into thinking about and building those plans. We don't do that anymore. Let the cloud service providers handle it. So if there's one thing I could leave the government audience with today, it's like stop obsessing about uptime and operations. Like there are really smart people in this world that are going to run really high level practices around the infrastructure as a service. You don't have to stress about that. In fact, the government's not good at it. So stop doing it. Like put your workload into the cloud and let's call it a day. For those folks that are working to build stuff on top of that, though, I kind of break it down into three parts. And so the middle piece that I spend a tremendous amount of my time on is coaching and teaching people about agile development, just incremental development to ship some value and software faster than the government is used to. That feels like it is sort of standing on its own 2 feet now. So when we tried to start doing some of this stuff circa 2013 to 15, 16, it was still felt like it was new, like government and contracting officers and people weren't really comfortable with these models. I think we're starting to turn the page on Agile, I hope. So it feels like that is becoming a more known quantity. It's less risky, quote unquote, in the minds of your average civil servant who's responsible for a system. So I feel like that one is kind of you starting to level out a little bit. The other two areas are design and DevOps, and I cannot preach about this stuff enough. I think a missing critical vulnerability for us at the moment, especially in terms of software we're building that any citizen or immigrant is ever going to touch, is the design piece. Like do the HCD human-centered design work up front that you need to really understand what software we're building before we even ship a line of code. And I still see government teams today critically understaffed. There's not a designer on the team, and there's not a person on the government side thinking about that stuff. And so it turns out that we're getting pretty good at incrementally shipping software, but it's not really the right software because we haven't been thinking about the user.
Yeah.
So that's part one is there could be a whole new next generation of HCD experts that need to come flood into government to help us think about the problem solving aspect. And then pivot to the back end of that. We are still not good at the DevSecOps piece. I think that is a buzzword still today, and I don't see a lot of agencies really doing it well. I mean, my lens is a little limited sometimes to just the civilian side and the teams I'm working with, but it feels new and it doesn't really feel like people know what's there under the covers. And so you'll hear a lot about DevSecOps at all these conferences and stuff, but I don't know who's really doing it that well. And so I think that's the next phase we need to think about is, okay, if your designers are telling you what problem to solve and we're shipping software using Agile and incremental builds, we need to get better at the DevSecOps part and the faster delivery of that stuff. Ship a tiny code change in one pull request and call it a day. And like you could roll that back if you needed to.
Yeah.
I don't think the industry of government and public sector is really there yet. Like I don't think we do DevOps well. So it kind of feels like there's a big green field for DevOps engineers to come in and just build those frameworks,
Interesting. I work in DevOps now and have for a bit of time. HCD. So I understand designing with the end user in mind. Like, what has your experience been with HCD? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
I'm not terribly familiar, and if I'm not, I imagine some of our listeners aren't. So
yeah, oh sure. Well, I have started including it in some of the training curriculum that I do as sort of the first phase of any software project. Like, just step back and before you engage and start writing code or even solutioning for an idea, spend the time that it takes to get to understand who's using your system, what are they trying to do, and push through those use cases there. And actually, I was sort of, I mean, I've always been a believer in the power of good designers on the development team. Like if you have people who can do front end treatments and stuff like that, like it radically makes your system better, the product. But we did deep dives on this with the USDS team at Veterans Affairs, and they were doing a lot of this really hard fought work of, let's stop. We're going to go to the Veterans Hospital. We're going to sit with the veterans. We're going to interview the veterans. We're going to figure out what they're trying to do for their claims or their healthcare or, whatever use case for whatever system.
And not to interrupt you, but when you say we, is it the actual engineers or?
No. So these are the term appointees for the U.S. Digital Service. So,
okay.
They're here on a 2-year rotation, but they came from Silicon Valley, and they are like deep HCD practitioners, and they were sort of bolting onto the sides of these USDS teams.
Right.
And they taught me a lot more about this. And it's like, man, you should do, a third or half or a quarter of the work up front on the design side before you ever even start thinking about, well, how do we solve this problem and shifting into coding? All that upfront work is just understanding who's the user and what problems they're trying to solve, and really defining that stuff properly so that we're solving the right problem, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It's interesting because everyone has their own aspect of delivering code and delivering an application. And I don't spend enough time in taking a step back, I should say, right? Because when you talk about coaching on Agile, I hear you. DevSecOps, I know there's a bunch of tools out there to try to get there. HCD, it's kind of like I guess a hole of a gap that I have. So I can totally see value why you guys are focusing on that with DevSecOps right now. And you mentioned like rollbacks, right? So very interesting.
But, all 3 pieces of the same delivery apparatus. The front end is design, Agile in the middle, and DevOps on the end. And they have to work together to get the best product, in my opinion, these days. But if you're leaving one of them out, it's like, wow, there's a critical vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is this part of, I know you do Agile Academy. Is that part of the training? If you could tell me a little bit about that, I think it's something that you're passionate about and love to hear.
Yeah, totally. I love this. This is an interesting part of my work where we're not building things, but along the way, I have found that I have to do a tremendous amount of educating folks, especially government stakeholders, of like, what is Agile? Why do you want it? How is it going to change your life? How does it help you? What's in it for me from their perspective as a government stakeholder? And so while knowing that my teams can deliver in an Agile manner, and this is the best thing since sliced bread, and we need to go do it, you have to persuade. So you got to teach these stakeholders what's about this, and how this thing is going to work in the government context, and warm them up. And so Agile Academy has grown out of that. It's like, it started as a deck for stakeholders that was like 4 pages long. And now it's 4 or 5 different classes, and it's a 2-day boot camp. And like, I'm teaching undergrad kids about it and all this stuff. But it's really as deep as you want to go. But it is, how do we, as a public sector, both government side and contractor side, embrace this thing called Agile and do it within the confines of government to just add faster software value. And so it is just training, Shay. Like, it's me talking about the lessons learned and the projects we've done, and teaching people from all these different Agile frameworks how to do this stuff. And we have been spiraling out into DevOps and HCD as well. And I just love it, because it's like, okay, here's the total package for how we want to go build something for you, without even talking about the tech stack or the product itself. Like, this is just a framework that you can use for any mission or agency problem that you want to go solve.
So 580 strategies, Agile Academy is part of that.
Yeah.
And somehow you're working with undergrads also.
Well, that's a whole other side of the conversation, Shay. Gosh, it is, where should I even start? I feel like the strain of public service is sort of like this bug that people catch. And it is just deeply ingrained in the way that I do work. So after 2017, when I'm like, okay, well, you've had to exit government, what are you doing with yourself for the greater good? And I couldn't have told you that then, but what was happening with me was like an identity crisis and like soul searching about, what am I going to go do for the next act of my career? I settled back on a bunch of nonprofit work and like helping students learn how to do this stuff well for different communities. And so some of that was teaching, some of that was advocacy. And then as the Agile Academy stuff was maturing and growing into courses that I was offering my clients, I had an ask from my old alma mater back in Oklahoma, like, can you come in and help us with some computer science curriculum? And I'm like, I would love to guest lecture. And slippery slope, the guest lecturing has turned into like, a part-time teaching gig here now, but I'm helping them with a class or two every semester and sort of teaching them all the stuff that we've talked about, and how do you, coming out of college these days, go into a, thriving public sector career building software.
So did this stem from, I don't even stem, no pun intended, out in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So OSTEM, was that, I know you're leading a team of like volunteers responsible for cloud services. Is that when you started formulating the framework for what would eventually become this curriculum? Or
it's sort of all blended together, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was serving as a volunteer for OSTEM, in the late days of the Obama administration there, just kind of as a helpful, let's go in and volunteer. And then after transition and inauguration was over, and it was like, okay, I have a lot more free time on my hands now. The old vice president for tech for Out in STEM rolled off, and they asked me to come join the board. And so I did. And that was a lot of, it felt like sort of running a team, not unlike the government. Like, we've got a small team of volunteers here that are keeping a nationwide nonprofit online. How do we keep the website up? How do we make sure our email marketing systems are working, And so I started teaching those volunteers the same stuff. And out of that kind of grew, like, we're going to do a hackathon for our annual conference. And do we have any, panels that we want to actually teach educational material out of? And so the student continuous learning aspect of it has kind of always been right there. It's like, well, we can be good and do good and be the subject matter experts, but we've also got to continue learning. And so I have found that's a pretty cool balance for me, because like, it challenges me to know what I'm talking about on the actual substance, but I can teach people as well off to the side, and how to do this stuff. So that's where the essence of Agile Academy started, was just teaching people how to make this thing work for real.
Okay. So you brought up something interesting. So you have worked as an individual contributor off the bat, and then you're in leadership. Now you're running your own firm. You started to talk about how you can strike the balance between knowing what you're talking about and leading. But how, I guess, from your experiences, like, how is it pivoting from an individual contributor to the leadership role? And what do you know now that maybe you wish you knew when you had made the decision that that was the path you wanted to take?
Yeah, man, so many thoughts here. So there, I think the first one is, you're going to have to sort of double your bandwidth. So it's like, choose where you want to focus your time, and just know that if you're going to take on the mantle of leadership, and whatever that means to you or whatever your organization needs, that means you're probably going to be spending less time writing code, keeping systems online, et cetera. So you're just going to have to understand, you got to let a little piece of that go. Like, you're not going to be the best of the best engineer anymore, but that's okay. You can still be a pretty good engineer and a great leader at the same time, and combine both of those things. I think the sharpest adjustment for me was, maybe this just comes back to sort of an entrepreneurship conversation, but in government and in the campaign and working at the Chickasaw Nation, like, I had always been an individual contributor or a mid-level manager in a massive organization. And that works great for a lot of people, like a W-2 salary, and you get your benefits and you go home at 5 o'clock, and legal and HR are right down the hall, and you don't have to worry about finance and all that other stuff. When I founded my own company, I'm like, this is going to be great. I'm an expert in IT and no cloud computing, do all this stuff. But then you realize you're a mighty team of one for foreseeable future, and you have to be everything. So you got to be the CEO and the CFO and the HR director and the legal person reviewing these contracts that are going out the door. And, oh, by the way, you're managing the team that's actually working, and you're worried about bookkeeping and all this other stuff. And so that was a super sharp adjustment. Was I went from being like one person being really good at one or two things, supported by a massive ecosystem of people, to now one person responsible for everything, and trying to bring all that together in a coherent manner. And so I don't have all the answers for you on that. Like, I'm trying to shift that gear right now of like, okay, we need to start hiring more folks to do some of this stuff so that I can delegate those things. But that is also a bit of calculus all on its own. Well, it's like, okay, what skills are you looking for? Who's the first people you bring on, supplement where I'm weak, and then
Right.
we can do more as the greater sum of our parts here than what I was able to do as just one guy in a mighty team of subcontractors or whatever. So
Yeah, it's been a heck of a journey, Rusty.
it's been a lot.
I'm hearing some thunder in the background. I think we're gonna get a no, I think it's my background. Maybe you have it too. So I think we're about to get a standard Washington DC evening thunderstorm here.
Yeah.
So before that goes full storm, are there any other points that you would like to leave our listeners with that you would care to share right now? We have a few minutes left before you wrap.
Sure. Oh gosh, I think I would leave folks with, in this industry these days, cloud computing is just so widespread, and there's so much cool technology out there, from startups to nonprofits to government to your, big commercial enterprises. So think about that, figure out what you're good at, and then pursue that stuff. But, it's never too late to sort of switch some of this stuff up and make career changes and stuff. And I have seen firsthand that you can do good in the world and you can be a contractor, and you can do good in the world and you can be a civil servant or a political appointee or on the board of a nonprofit. It just sort of comes down to you figuring out how and where you want to contribute that stuff to the greater good. And so there's lots of different ways to do that. And there's not going to be one size that fits all for everybody. So for the tech engineers out there, it's like, don't be afraid to raise your hand in a meeting and, take a leadership role, but also don't be afraid to pull the parachute ripcord out of government and go try something radically different, and join a startup for 2 or 3 years and see how it goes. So there's lots of different ways to, raise the watermark of this IT culture that we're all trying to build. That's kind of, unfolding day by day. And it's super exciting because there's so much more work to do. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's evolving so fast. And I think you do bring up an excellent point that you do have to leave your comfort zone in order to continue to grow, because the technology is changing so quickly that if you're not willing to do that, you might not be doing the right thing in tech.
You might get left behind. Absolutely. Yeah.
You might get left behind. So Rusty, there's a few things that I want to bring up. First, the two paths that you brought up, right off the bat, right? Diving deep from a tech standpoint, or going towards the leadership, kind of path. I thought that was pretty interesting. And then just your thoughts on the coaching around Agile, how we're finally probably on our feet, having begun that. You began that conversation back in 2013. HCD for me was super interesting. Understanding where the software is going to go before you start shipping code seems to make a heck of a lot of sense, but something that I haven't really truly considered before. And then, DevSecOps. And then, I bringing it up at the end, doing good in the world, and you can do tech, right? So I think that, it was time well spent chatting with you, Rusty. Hopefully we can meet up in person sometime, but until then, to my listeners out there, we try to bring folks on like Rusty that can bring value. And I think you certainly did today. It was a great conversation. If there's folks out there, or maybe you know them, Dusty, that you think could come on the podcast in the DevDC, DMV area and bring some value to our listeners, I would love folks to reach out to me, or you to reach out to me, Dusty, and we can align that. So until next time, Rusty, you have a wonderful day, and it was great chatting with you.
All right. Thanks, Shay. This has been a great conversation. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. All right. We'll see you around. Bye.